What happens when a man who has lost everything meets a child who has nothing left? Sometimes the most broken hearts are the ones capable of the greatest healing. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching this story from? We'd love to know. The Wyoming wind cut through my coat like a blade, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and the weight of another empty evening. I stood on the porch of Thornfield Ranch, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of old blood. 3 years had passed since I'd buried my wife Sarah and our boy Samuel, yet every sunset still felt like a fresh wound. My name is Ezekiel Thornfield, though most folks just call me Zeke. At 38, I'd already lived more sorrow than most men see in a lifetime. This ranch, once filled with laughter and the promise of generations to come, now echoed with nothing but the hollow sound of my boots on weathered floorboards and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. The storm had been brewing all day, and I could feel it in my bones. Weather like this always reminded me of the night I lost everything. The fever that took them both within a week of each other, leaving me with nothing but memories and a ranch too big for one broken man. I was about to head inside when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind playing tricks. But there it was again. A soft whimpering coming from near the old oak tree by the gate. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to retreat into the safety of my solitude. But something, perhaps the memory of my own boy's voice, pulled me down those porch steps. The rain had started, fat drops that promised a deluge. Through the gathering darkness, I saw a small figure huddled against the base of the oak tree, no bigger than a bundle of old clothes. As I drew closer, my heart nearly stopped. It was a child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, soaked to the bone and shivering like a leaf in a gale. His clothes were little more than rags, torn and stained with mud and God knows what else. Dark hair plastered to his small head, and when he looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes, I saw something that cut deeper than any knife, a pain that mirrored my own. "Please, mister," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the increasing wind. "My mama, she died 3 days ago. I ain't got nowhere else to go." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, rain beginning to soak through my own clothes, staring down at this child who had somehow found his way to my doorstep. Part of me wanted to turn away, to protect what little remained of my heart from another potential loss. But looking at him, this small broken thing seeking shelter, I couldn't walk away. "What's your name, boy?" I asked, kneeling down to his level, water dripping from the brim of my hat. "Cornelius, sir, but most folks call me Corey." His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely get the words out. Without another thought, I scooped him up in my arms. He weighed next to nothing, all bones and determination wrapped in wet rags. "Well, Corey, looks like you're in need of a warm meal and a dry place to sleep." I carried him toward the house, feeling the small body trembling against my chest. "My mama said, before she passed, she said I should find good folks who might need help with their ranch work. Said maybe someone would let me stay if I proved useful." No, the innocence in his voice, the desperate hope, nearly undid me completely. This child was trying to bargain for survival with the promise of labor that his small hands could barely manage. It reminded me too much of the boy I'd lost, the son who would never grow up to work alongside me on this land. "How long you been on your own?" I asked as we reached the porch. 3 days, sir. I got real sick real fast. Neighbors said they couldn't take me in, what with their own troubles and all. Someone mentioned there was a ranch out this way where a man lived alone. Thought maybe—" His voice trailed off as I pushed through the front door, carrying him into the warmth of the main room. The fire I'd built earlier was still crackling in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I set him down gently on the old sofa Sarah used to favor for her evening sewing. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch your death," I said, already moving toward the chest where I kept some of Samuel's old things. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out a shirt and pants that would be too big but would have to do. Corey's eyes went wide as he took in the room, the stone fireplace, the handmade furniture, the portraits on the mantelpiece. "This is a real nice place, mister. You must be awful successful." I handed him the dry clothes, noting how carefully he handled them as if they were made of spun gold. "There's a screen behind you for privacy. Get changed, and I'll see about getting some food in you." As he disappeared behind the wooden screen, I moved to the kitchen, my mind reeling. In the space of 10 minutes, my carefully ordered solitude had been shattered by this small boy who carried his own weight of loss. I put coffee on to boil and started pulling together what I could for a quick meal: leftover cornbread, some preserved meat, and the last of the apples from the root cellar. "Mister?" Corey's voice came from behind me, uncertain and small. I turned to see him swimming in Samuel's old clothes, the shirt hanging nearly to his knees, pants rolled up several times at the cuffs. But he was dry, and the fire was already bringing some color back to his pale cheeks. "The name's Ezekiel," I said, setting a plate of food on the table. "But you can call me Zeke." He approached the table as if afraid it might disappear, his eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that spoke of real hunger. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Zeke. I promise I won't be any trouble. I can work real hard, and I don't eat much." Something in my chest twisted at his earnest attempt to sell himself as worthy of basic human kindness. I poured him a glass of milk, fresh from this morning's milking, and watched as he stared at it like it was a miracle. "When did you last eat, son?" "Day before yesterday, I think. Found some berries yesterday, but—" He shrugged, as if going without food was simply part of life's natural order. "Well, you eat your fill now. We'll worry about everything else tomorrow." I watched him eat, trying not to let my emotions show as he savored every bite with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. The storm was picking up outside, wind howling around the corners of the house and rain hammering against the windows. "Mama always said that God provides," Corey said between bites, his voice thoughtful. "Even when it don't seem like it at first. She said sometimes help comes from places you don't expect." The simple faith in his words caught me off guard. I'd stopped believing in divine providence the night I buried my family. Stopped believing that anything good could come from the arbitrary cruelties of life. Yet here was this child who had lost everything, still holding on to hope. "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman," I managed. "Yes, sir. She taught me to read and write and how to be respectful to my betters. Said education and manners would take me further than most anything else." He paused, looking up at me with those serious brown eyes. "She also taught me that when someone shows you kindness, you remember it forever." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it shook the windows. Corey flinched but didn't cry out, though I could see the fear flash across his young face. "Storms don't usually last long out here," I said, surprised by my own desire to comfort him. "You'll be safe tonight." "Mr. Zeke," his voice was barely above a whisper, "when morning comes, and if you decide you can't keep me, could you maybe point me toward the next ranch? I don't want to be a burden, but I don't rightly know which way to go from here." The question hung in the air between us, loaded with more weight than any 8-year-old should have to carry. Here was a child preparing for rejection, trying to make it easier for me to send him back into the harsh world that had already taken everything from him. I looked at him sitting there in my dead son's clothes, his small hands wrapped around a glass of milk, brown eyes full of hope and resignation in equal measure. Something shifted inside me, a wall I'd built around my heart developing its first crack in 3 years. But before I could answer, before I could even begin to process what having this boy here might mean, a sound outside made us both freeze. It wasn't the storm. It was the unmistakable sound of horses approaching through the rain, their hooves splashing through the mud of my yard. Corey's face went white, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "They followed me," he whispered, terror evident in every line of his small body. The sound of boots on my porch echoed through the house, followed by a heavy pounding on the front door. Chapter 2. The pounding on the door came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a gruff voice calling through the storm. "Open up! Sheriff's business!" Corey had gone rigid beside me, his face pale as winter snow. "They're gonna take me back," he whispered, shrinking lower in his chair. "Please, Mr. Zeke, don't let them take me back." "Back where?" I asked. But the fear in his eyes told me more than words could. I stood slowly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay here, boy. Let me handle this." I made my way to the front door, my mind racing. Through the window, I could make out 3 figures on horseback, their shapes dark against the storm. The lead rider dismounted, water streaming from his long coat as he approached my porch. I opened the door to find Sheriff Jeremiah Burke standing there, hat pulled low against the rain, his weathered face grim with purpose. Behind him, still mounted, were 2 men I didn't recognize, one heavy-set with a permanent scowl, the other thin and nervous-looking. "Evening, Zeke," Burke said, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to bother you in weather like this, but we're tracking a runaway. Boy about 8 years old, brown hair, traveling alone. You seen anything?" I kept my expression neutral, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Runaway from where?" "Millbrook Orphanage, about 40 miles east of here," the heavy-set man called out from his horse, impatience clear in his voice. "Kid's been missing 3 days. Name's Cornelius Whitmore." Burke shot the man a sharp look before turning back to me. "This here's Mr. Garrett, runs the orphanage. Says the boy's been nothing but trouble since he arrived, violent tendencies, theft, that sort of thing." I thought of the polite, frightened child sitting in my kitchen, the way he'd thanked me for every kindness, and felt my jaw tighten. "That's so?" "Damn right," Garrett spat, dismounting with a heavy splash into the mud. "Boy's been a menace since the day his mother dumped him on our doorstep. Fighting with the other children, stealing food, refusing to follow orders. We've got a responsibility to bring him back and teach him proper discipline." Something cold settled in my stomach at the man's words. I'd seen enough of the world to recognize cruelty dressed up as righteousness. "And you think he came this way?" Tracked him as far as Cedar Ridge," the thin man said, his voice nasal and irritating. "Lost the trail in the storm. But this is the only ranch for miles in this direction." Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Corey peeking around the corner from the kitchen, his small face pressed against the glass. The terror in his eyes decided things for me. "Well, gentlemen, I'm sorry you rode all this way in the storm," I said, stepping slightly forward to block their view into the house. "But I haven't seen any children around here. Just me and my cattle. Same as always." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "You mind if we take a look around, just to be sure?" "Matter of fact, I do mind." I let steel creep into my voice, the same tone I'd used with claim jumpers and cattle rustlers in my younger days. "This is private property, and you've got no warrant." Burke shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Zeke, no need to get worked up. We're just trying to find a lost child and get him back where he belongs." "Where he belongs," I repeated, thinking of the desperation in Corey's voice when he'd asked me not to let them take him back. "And where exactly would that be, Sheriff, with a man who calls an 8-year-old boy a menace?" "That boy is legally in our care," Garrett snarled, stepping closer. "His mother signed the papers before she died. We've got every right to retrieve our property." Property! The word hung in the air like a curse, and I felt something dark and protective rise in my chest. It was the same feeling I'd had when Samuel was threatened by a rattlesnake in the yard, a primal need to shield the innocent from harm. "Well then," I said slowly, "I guess you'll need to keep looking, because there's no lost boys here." The thin man whispered something urgent to Garrett, who glanced up at the darkening sky. Rain was coming down harder now, and the wind was picking up enough to make their horses restless. "We'll be back," Garrett promised, his voice carrying a threat. "Come morning, we'll search every inch of this territory if we have to. That boy belongs to us, and we aim to collect him." "You do what you think best," I replied evenly. "But right now you're trespassing on my land in the middle of a storm. I suggest you head back to town before you catch your death." Burke nodded reluctantly. "Zeke's right about the weather. We should hole up in Cedar Ridge tonight. Try again tomorrow when we can see what we're doing." Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but another gust of wind nearly knocked him off balance. With a final venomous glare at me, he mounted his horse. "This ain't over, Thornfield. That boy's coming back with us one way or another." I watched them ride away into the storm, waiting until their shapes disappeared completely before closing the door. When I turned around, Corey was standing in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down his young face. "They're gonna take me back," he said, his voice breaking. "They're gonna make me go back to that place." I knelt down to his level, seeing the raw terror in his eyes. "Tell me about this orphanage, Corey. The truth now." He wiped his nose on his sleeve, struggling to compose himself. "It ain't like what they probably told you, Mr. Zeke. Mr. Garrett, he ain't a kind man. None of them are. They make us work from dawn to dusk, barely feed us, and if you complain or cause trouble, they—" His voice trailed off, and he pulled up his shirt sleeve. Even in the lamplight, I could see the faded bruises on his thin arm, finger-shaped marks that spoke of rough handling. "They said my mama was a whore, and I was probably going to be no good just like her," he continued, his young voice trying to stay steady. "Said the only way to beat the devil out of me was with hard work and harder discipline. When I stood up for one of the little girls they were being mean to, Mr. Garrett said I was getting too big for my britches." A cold rage began building in my chest. I'd known men like Garrett before, bullies who hid their cruelty behind authority and righteousness. "Is that when you decided to leave?" Corey nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I heard them talking about sending me to work the mines up north. Said I was old enough to earn my keep that way. I got scared and ran. I didn't mean to cause trouble for anyone, honest. I couldn't go to the mines, Mr. Zeke. Kids who go there don't come back." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The Millbrook orphanage wasn't a sanctuary for lost children. It was a business that profited from their labor and misery. And now they wanted Corey back, not out of care, but because he represented lost income. I stood up, my decision crystallizing like ice forming on a winter pond. "Well then, I guess we'll just have to make sure they don't find you." Hope flickered in his eyes, fragile as a candle flame. "You mean you'll let me stay, even with them looking for me?" "Corey," I said, surprised by the certainty in my own voice, "what did you ask me when you first got here?" I asked if I could stay tonight on account of my mama dying. And what did I tell you?" His face scrunched up in concentration, trying to remember through his fear and exhaustion. "You said I could stay, but they're coming back, Mr. Zeke. They'll search everywhere, and when they find me—" "Let me worry about that," I interrupted. "Right now, you need sleep. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to keep you safe." I led him upstairs to the small room that had been Samuel's, trying not to notice how perfectly Corey fit into the space my own son had once occupied. The bed was still made with Sarah's careful attention to detail, the quilt she'd sewn pulled tight across the mattress. "This was your boy's room, wasn't it?" Corey asked softly, running his small hand along the wooden bed frame. "How did you know I had a son?" "The clothes, and the way you got sad when you looked at them. Plus there's drawings on the wall there that look like kid drawings." He pointed to a corner where Samuel had once drawn horses and cowboys with charcoal, images I'd never had the heart to wash away. "His name was Samuel," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I hadn't spoken my son's name aloud in over a year. "What happened to him?" "Fever took him and his mother 3 years ago." Corey was quiet for a long moment, studying the drawings with the serious attention children gave to important things. I bet he was a good boy. He was. "I'll try real hard not to mess up his room, Mr. Zeke, and I promise I won't touch nothing that was his without asking first." The simple respect in his words, the careful way he approached this sacred space, touched something deep inside me that had been frozen for too long. "Corey," I said, "in the morning those men are going to come back. They're going to search this ranch from top to bottom, but I want you to know something. I'm not going to let them take you back to that place. Do you understand me?" He nodded solemnly, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. He'd learned not to trust too deeply, not to hope too much. "Now get some sleep. We've got a big day ahead of us." I was halfway down the stairs when his voice called out softly, "Mr. Zeke, thank you for the food and the dry clothes and for not turning me away. My mama always said kindness was the rarest gift in the world." I stood there in the darkness of the stairwell, feeling something crack open inside my chest. Upstairs was a child who had lost everything, trusting me to protect him from a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. 3 years ago, I might have called it divine providence. Tonight, I just called it responsibility. But as I sat by the dying fire, planning how to keep a small boy safe from men who saw him as property, I heard the sound that would change everything, the distant rumble of more horses approaching through the storm. This time, they weren't alone. Chapter 3. I moved to the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. What I saw made my blood run cold. Garrett had returned, but this time he'd brought reinforcements, at least 6 men on horseback, all armed, surrounding my property like a military operation. My hand instinctively moved to the rifle mounted above the fireplace, but I stopped myself. Violence would only prove their claims about Corey being dangerous, and it would certainly end any chance of keeping him safe. I needed to be smarter than that. "Mr. Zeke?" Corey's voice came from the top of the stairs, small and frightened. "They came back, didn't they?" "Stay upstairs," I called softly. "No matter what happens, don't come down until I tell you it's safe." The pounding on my door was more aggressive this time, accompanied by shouts and the sound of men spreading out around the house. Through the window, I could see some of them heading toward the barn and outbuildings. "Thornfield!" Garrett's voice boomed through the storm. "We know the boy's here. Open up now, or we'll tear this place apart board by board." I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping onto the porch with as much calm as I could muster. Garrett stood there with a legal document in his hand, his face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "Got myself a proper warrant this time," he announced, waving the paper. "Judge Morrison signed it personally. We've got legal authority to search these premises for stolen property." "Stolen property?" I kept my voice level, though anger was building like pressure in a steam kettle. "That boy belongs to the Millbrook orphanage by law. His mother signed custody papers before she died, making him our legal ward. Taking him constitutes theft of institutional property." The casual way he referred to a child as property made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to remain calm. "And what makes you think he's here?" "Because, Mr. Thornfield," a new voice said from behind Garrett, "we have a witness." Judge Morrison himself stepped into the lamplight, his black coat dripping with rain, his thin face sharp with authority. Behind him stood a woman I recognized, Mrs. Prudence Hawthorne, my nearest neighbor and the biggest gossip in 3 counties. "Prudence saw the boy through your window not 2 hours ago," Morrison continued. "She was riding back from town when she stopped to check on you during the storm. Imagine her surprise when she saw a child she'd never seen before, eating at your table." My jaw tightened as I looked at Mrs. Hawthorne, who had the grace to look ashamed, but not enough to meet my eyes. "Is that so, Prudence?" "I was only concerned for your welfare, Ezekiel," she said defensively. "When I saw the boy, I thought you should know that people were looking for him. I was trying to help." "Help," I repeated flatly. "Help by betraying a frightened child to the very people he'd fled from." "The boy's presence here confirms he's a runaway," Morrison declared. "Mr. Garrett has provided documentation proving legal custody, and Mrs. Hawthorne's testimony establishes that you're harboring him unlawfully. I'm ordering you to surrender the child immediately. And if I refuse, then you'll be arrested for kidnapping, theft, and interfering with legal custody proceedings," Morrison replied coldly. "The choice is yours, Mr. Thornfield." Before I could respond, one of Garrett's men called out from near the barn. "Found fresh tracks heading toward the house, small boots child-sized." Garrett's grin widened. "Search the house, every room, every closet, every hiding place. And when you find him, remember, the boy's dangerous. Don't hesitate to use whatever force necessary to subdue him." He's 8 years old, I said, my control finally beginning to slip. He's a violent delinquent who's already assaulted other children and staff, Garrett shot back. Age doesn't make him less dangerous. I watched helplessly as Morrison's men filed into my house, their boots tracking mud across Sarah's carefully maintained floors, their rough hands pouring through my belongings. Upstairs, I could hear them opening doors, searching through rooms that held 3 years of carefully preserved memories. "Mr. Zeke!" Corey's voice came from somewhere above, high and frightened. "What's happening?" "Found him," one of the men shouted triumphantly. My heart sank as they dragged Corey down the stairs, his small frame dwarfed by the rough hands gripping his arms. He was still wearing Samuel's clothes, now wrinkled from sleep, his hair sticking up at odd angles. But what broke my heart was the look of betrayal in his eyes as he saw Mrs. Hawthorne standing with his pursuers. "Please," Corey said, his voice barely above a whisper as his eyes found mine. "Please don't let them take me back. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't cause any trouble. Just please—" "Shut your mouth, boy," Garrett snarled, backhanding Corey across the face, hard enough to snap his head sideways. Something exploded inside me. Before I knew what I was doing, I had Garrett by the throat, slamming him back against the porch railing with enough force to rattle the entire structure. "Touch him again," I growled, my voice barely human, "and I'll break every bone in your worthless body." "Zeke, stop!" Sheriff Burke's voice cut through my rage. "You're making this worse." Morrison's men had their guns drawn, all pointed at me, but I didn't care. All I could see was the red mark on Corey's cheek, the fear in his eyes, the way he flinched when Garrett raised his hand. "The boy's coming with us," Morrison said coldly. "Release Mr. Garrett immediately, or my men will shoot you down where you stand." Slowly, reluctantly, I loosened my grip on Garrett's throat. He stumbled backward, gasping and rubbing his neck, his eyes promising future retribution. "You've made a powerful enemy tonight, Thornfield," he wheezed. "That boy's going to pay for what you just did." The threat was clear, and Corey understood it too. His small body went rigid with terror at the implications. "Wait," I said, my mind racing desperately for some solution, some way to protect him. "Judge Morrison, I want to petition for legal custody of the boy." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that his mother's signature was obtained under duress. That Millbrook Orphanage is an illegal operation that profits from child labor. That this boy has been abused and neglected in their care." "You have proof of these allegations?" I pulled up Corey's sleeve, exposing the bruises that marked his thin arm. "This is proof enough." Morrison examined the marks with the detached interest of a man accustomed to human suffering. "These could have been sustained during his flight from the orphanage. Mr. Garrett, do you have documentation of the boy's placement?" Garrett produced a sheaf of papers, his grin returning as he saw victory within reach. "All legal and proper, Your Honor. The mother, one Lucy Whitmore, signed full custody over to our institution. The boy's been nothing but trouble since day one, and now he's corrupted a respectable member of the community into harboring a fugitive." "The petition is denied," Morrison declared. "Mr. Thornfield, you will surrender the child immediately, and you will pay a fine of $50 for unlawful harboring. Consider yourself fortunate that I don't press additional charges." "Mr. Zeke," Corey whispered, his young voice breaking with despair, "you said you wouldn't let them take me." The accusation in his words cut deeper than any knife. I had promised to protect him, and now I was powerless to keep that promise. The law, corrupted though it was, stood against us. "I'm sorry, son," I said, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. Garrett grabbed Corey roughly by the arm, jerking him toward the waiting horses. "Time to go, boy. You've caused enough trouble for one night." "Please," Corey begged, twisting in Garrett's grip to look back at me. "Please don't let them take me to the mines. I'll work real hard here, I promise. I'll earn my keep and never complain about nothing." Mines. The word hit everyone present like a physical blow. Even Morrison looked startled. "What mines?" Burke asked sharply. Garrett's face flushed red. The boy's been telling stories, trying to avoid his responsibilities. We provide honest work for older children who... He's 8 years old, I said flatly. Old enough to learn the value of hard work, Garrett replied, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Morrison frowned. Mr. Garrett, my warrant authorized the retrieval of an orphaned child, not the procurement of mining labor. Perhaps we should discuss... The boy belongs to us, Garrett interrupted desperately. What we do with our wards is our business, not the court's. But I could see doubt creeping into Morrison's eyes, and hope began to flicker in my chest. If I could just plant enough suspicion, raise enough questions. Judge Morrison, I said carefully, I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. And what would that be? Let the boy stay here as my ward, at least temporarily. Give me time to investigate the conditions at Millbrook Orphanage properly. If what Corey says is true, then other children are at risk as well. Garrett's face went white. You can't seriously be considering... Actually, Morrison said thoughtfully, that's not entirely unreasonable. Mr. Thornfield, you're a respected member of the community with no criminal record. The boy seems... attached to you, perhaps a temporary placement pending investigation. Absolutely not, Garrett exploded. That boy is legally our property. You can't just... Actually, Mr. Garrett, Morrison said coldly, I can do exactly that. Children are not property, and if there's any suspicion of abuse or illegal labor practices, the court has a duty to investigate. I saw my chance and took it. I'll post bond for the boy's appearance at any hearing. I'll take full responsibility for his welfare and behavior, and I'll personally fund an investigation into the Millbrook Orphanage's practices. Morrison considered this for a long moment while Garrett sputtered protests and Corey held his breath. Finally, the judge nodded. Very well. The boy will remain in your custody pending a full investigation. Mr. Garrett, you and your men will return to Cedar Ridge immediately. Any attempt to approach this property or the child without court authorization will result in arrest. The relief on Corey's face was like sunrise after the longest night. But as Garrett and his men mounted their horses, I caught the murderous look in his eyes and knew this wasn't over. We had won a battle, not the war. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the storm, Corey threw his arms around my waist, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. You kept your promise, he whispered against my coat. You really kept your promise. I looked down at this small boy who had somehow found his way past every wall I'd built around my heart, and realized that somewhere in the last few hours, everything had changed. I wasn't just sheltering a runaway anymore, I was protecting my family. Come on, son, I said, the word feeling natural and right. Let's get you back inside where it's warm. As we walked toward the house together, Corey's small hand in mine, I caught Mrs. Hawthorne staring at us with something that might have been regret in her eyes. But it was too late for regrets now. The line had been drawn, and we both knew which side we were on. Thunder rolled across the Wyoming sky as we stepped through the door, but for the first time in 3 years, the sound didn't remind me of death and loss. Instead, it sounded like the promise of a new beginning, like the voice of a God I'd thought had forgotten me entirely. Sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected packages, like a small boy with brown eyes and an unshakable faith that kindness still existed in the world. And sometimes, in saving someone else, you discover that you've saved yourself as well. The storm would pass, as storms always do. But what we'd built together in its wake, this fragile, impossible thing called family, would endure long after the last thunder faded into silence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of redemption and hope. Tell us in the comments what touched your heart most about Zeke and Corey's story, and share where you're watching from around the world. Your support helps us bring these meaningful tales to life.